Millionaire impregnates his employee and reveals he can't have children. She's left in shock. On the dusty streets of Oakville, on the outskirts of Chicago, Sarah Johnson walked with determined steps. At 25, her beauty was undeniable, but her brown eyes reflected a determination that went beyond the physical. She had grown up watching her mother work tirelessly in other people's homes and had sworn to herself that her destiny would be different. The plan had been forming in her mind for months. Michael Anderson, the construction tycoon, was her target. She had seen him in gossip magazines, always surrounded by beautiful women, but none had managed to trap him. "I'll be different," Sarah told herself as she fixed her hair in front of the cracked mirror in her room. That night, at the opening of a new Anderson construction building, Sarah managed to sneak into the party. With a borrowed dress and all her determination, she approached the bar where Michael was drinking alone. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a captivating smile. Michael looked her up and down, clearly impressed. "Not at all, Miss Sarah Johnson," she replied, extending her hand. As the night progressed, Sarah deployed all her charm. She laughed at Michael's jokes, listened attentively as he talked about his business, and when he proposed going somewhere more private, she accepted with feigned shyness. In Michael's penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Sarah gave herself to passion with a single goal in mind. As Michael slept, she looked out the window at the city lights. "This is just the beginning," she thought, caressing her belly with an enigmatic smile. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Sarah managed to become a constant presence in Michael's life. Dinners, charity events, even business trips. Wherever Michael went, Sarah went. The press began to speculate about the mysterious woman who had captivated Chicago's most eligible bachelor. Finally, one Sunday morning, as they were having breakfast on the penthouse terrace, Sarah decided it was time. "Michael, I have something to tell you," she began with a calculated mix of nervousness and excitement in her voice. "What is it, my love?" he asked, lowering his newspaper. "I'm pregnant." Michael's face paled. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flash of something dark in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a smile. "That's unexpected," he finally said. Sarah took his hand. "I know it's sudden, but I'm so happy. I've always dreamed of starting a family with you." Michael nodded slowly. "I need a moment to process this, excuse me?" He got up and entered the apartment, leaving Sarah alone on the terrace. She smiled to herself. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, very soon, she would secure her future and that of her child. What Sarah didn't know was that inside the apartment, Michael was making a phone call in a low, urgent voice. "I need you to investigate something for me," he said, "and do it quickly." 2 weeks after Sarah's announcement, the atmosphere in Michael's penthouse had subtly changed. His smile seemed more tense, his hugs less warm. Sarah attributed it to the initial surprise of the news, convinced that he would soon adapt to the idea of being a father. One night, as they were dining in silence, Michael finally spoke. "Sarah, we need to talk about the pregnancy." Her heart skipped a beat. Did he suspect something? "Of course, my love. What is it?" Michael looked at her intently, his dark eyes unreadable. "There's something I need to confess, something I should have told you before, but I never found the right moment." Sarah held her breath. Michael continued, 5 years ago, I had a vasectomy." The world seemed to stop around Sarah. Michael's words echoed in her ears, threatening to destroy her careful plan. "What?" she finally managed to articulate. "But how is that possible?" "I'm pregnant, Michael. The doctors confirmed it." Michael slowly stood up, his face a mask of disappointment and something else. Contained anger. "That's precisely what I'd like to know, Sarah. How is it possible that you're pregnant with my child when it's medically impossible for me to be the father?" Sarah felt the ground opening beneath her feet. Her mind was working at full speed, looking for a way out, an explanation, anything that could save the situation. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe the vasectomy wasn't successful. I've heard they sometimes fail." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "I get regular checkups, Sarah. The vasectomy worked perfectly. What I want to know is who the real father of that baby is." Tears began to run down Sarah's cheeks. Everything was crumbling before her eyes. "Michael, I swear I haven't been with anyone else. There has to be an explanation." He looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. I always knew you were ambitious, Sarah, from the moment I saw you at that party. But this is low even for someone like you." Michael's words hit her like a fist. Had he always known her intentions? Had he been playing with her all this time? "I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to defend herself, but her voice lacked conviction. Michael approached her, his presence suddenly threatening. "I think you know perfectly well. The question is, what are we going to do now?" Sarah looked at him, confused and scared. "What do you mean?" "Well, dear," Michael said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "we have a problem on our hands. You want financial security, and I need to maintain my public image. Perhaps we can come to an agreement that benefits us both." Sarah's brain was working at full speed. Was Michael suggesting what she thought? A charade, a fake family? "I don't understand," she said, trying to buy time. Michael smiled, but there was no warmth in that gesture. "It's simple. You go ahead with the pregnancy, I give you the life you've always wanted, and in return we keep up appearances. A happy marriage, an heir to the Anderson empire. Everyone wins." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The plan she had carefully crafted had transformed into something twisted and dangerous. But what alternative did she have? "And if I refuse?" she asked, fearing the answer. Michael's eyes glinted with a coldness Sarah had never seen before. "Then, dear, I'm afraid you'll have to go back to Oakville empty-handed. And believe me, I'll make sure no doors open for you in this city." At that moment, Sarah realized she had terribly underestimated Michael Anderson. What she had believed to be a master plan had turned into a trap, and she was caught in the middle of it all. "I need time to think," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Michael nodded. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Sarah, the clock is ticking, and in this game I hold all the cards." As Michael retreated to his study, Sarah was left alone in the dining room, tears running freely down her face. How had she gotten to this point? And more importantly, how was she going to get out of this situation? In the solitude of the night, as the wind of Chicago blew against the penthouse windows, Sarah realized that her real test was just beginning. The game had changed, and now she would have to fight not only for her future, but for her own survival in a world that suddenly seemed much more dangerous and complicated than she had ever imagined. Sarah spent the night tossing and turning in the bed that now seemed too big and cold. Michael's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of the past few months. How had she gotten to this point? And who was really the father of her child? As the dawn light began to filter through the curtains, a sudden memory hit her with the force of lightning. Jake, Michael's security guard. That night, just over 2 months ago. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the memories flood her. It had been after a particularly heated argument with Michael. She had left the penthouse, furious and hurt, determined to get some air. Jake was on duty that night, and he had seen her crying in the lobby. "Are you okay, Miss Sarah?" he had asked, his voice full of genuine concern. One thing led to another. Comfort turned into confidences, confidences into caresses, and before she knew it, they were in the small security room, giving in to a passion born of loneliness and the need for comfort. Sarah brought her hands to her face, the realization falling on her like a crushing weight. Jake. He was the father of her child. With trembling hands, she took her phone and searched for Jake's number. They had exchanged numbers that night, promising it would be their little secret. She had never called him until now. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Jake, it's me, Sarah. We need to talk. It's urgent." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" "No, nothing is okay. Please, can we meet? In the park near the fountain in an hour." Jake agreed, concern evident in his voice. An hour later, Sarah was sitting on a park bench, her heart beating fast. She saw Jake approaching, his security uniform replaced by jeans and a simple t-shirt. He looked different outside the context of Michael's building, younger and more vulnerable. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, sitting next to her. She took a deep breath. "Jake, I'm pregnant." His eyes widened. "What? But is it?" "It's yours," Sarah interrupted. "Michael can't have children. It's complicated." Jake sat in silence for a moment, processing the information. Then, to Sarah's surprise, a smile began to form on his face. "I'm going to be a father," he said, more to himself than to her. "Sarah, this is... wow." Jake's reaction took her by surprise. She had expected shock, maybe anger, but not this almost childlike joy. "Jake, it's not that simple," she said, trying to make him understand the gravity of the situation. "Michael thinks the baby is his." "Well, actually, he knows it's not, but it's complicated." Jake's smile slowly faded. "What do you mean?" Sarah told him everything. Her original plan, Michael's revelation, the proposal to keep up appearances. With each word, she saw how Jake's expression changed from joy to confusion and finally to indignation. "You can't be serious," he finally said. "That's my child. Our child. You can't just hand it over to Michael as if it were a commodity." "You don't understand," Sarah replied, tears threatening to fall again. "I don't have a choice. Michael has the power to destroy me, to destroy us both." Jake stood up, pacing in front of the bench. "There are always choices, Sarah. I can't believe you're considering this. What about the child's rights? What about my rights as a father?" "Jake, please," Sarah pleaded. "I need you to understand. I need you to keep the secret." He looked at her, and for a moment Sarah saw in his eyes the sweet and understanding man who had comforted her that night. But then something changed. A determination she hadn't seen before appeared in his gaze. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't accept this," he said firmly. "That baby is my child, and I have the right to be part of its life." Sarah felt panic taking over her. "Jake, please think about what you're saying. Michael is a powerful man. If he finds out that you're the father..." "What? He'll fire me?" Jake interrupted with a bitter laugh. "I'd rather lose my job than lose my child." "You don't understand," Sarah insisted. "Michael can do much more than just fire you. He can destroy our lives." Jake looked at her intently, his eyes full of a mixture of pain and determination. "Then let him try. I'm not going to give up on my child without a fight." With those words, Jake turned around and began to walk away. Sarah jumped up, grabbing his arm. "Wait! What are you going to do?" He stopped, looking at her over his shoulder. "I'm going to think, and then I'm going to do the right thing. I suggest you do the same, Sarah." As she watched Jake disappear among the trees in the park, Sarah felt the world crumbling around her. Her plan, which once seemed so solid, was now a house of cards about to collapse. The following days were torture for Sarah. Every sound startled her. Every look from Michael filled her with fear. Did he already know the truth? Had Jake spoken? One afternoon, as Sarah tried to distract herself by reading a magazine on the penthouse sofa, Michael entered with a smile that made her blood run cold. "Sarah, dear, we need to talk," he said, sitting across from her. She closed the magazine, trying to control the trembling of her hands. "What's going on, Michael?" "I've been thinking about our situation," he began, his voice soft but with a dangerous edge. "And I think I've come to an interesting conclusion." Sarah held her breath. Michael continued. "You see, at first I was surprised, even a little hurt by your deception. But then I realized something. This could be beneficial for both of us." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, confused. Michael leaned forward, his eyes shining with an intensity that frightened her. "Think about it. An heir to the Anderson Empire, a perfect family to show off at social events. Your beauty and youth combined with my power and wealth. It's the perfect image." Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "But what about the real father?" Michael's smile turned cold. "Oh dear, do you really think I don't know? Jake, right? The security guard. A charming cliché, I must say." Sarah's heart stopped for a moment. You knew?" "Of course I knew," Michael replied with disdain. "I have eyes and ears everywhere, Sarah. Nothing happens in my building without me knowing about it." "Then why didn't I say anything before?" Michael completed. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go with your little plan. I must admit, you've impressed me. You've got guts, Sarah. It's one of the things that attract me to you." Sarah felt her head spinning. All this time, Michael had been playing with her, manipulating her like a puppet. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael leaned back in his seat, his relaxed posture contrasting with the tension in the air. "It's simple. I want us to go ahead with the pregnancy. I want you to be my wife, the mother of my heir. In return, you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. Wealth, status, security. And Jake? Sarah asked, fearing the answer. Michael's smile turned predatory. Jake is not a problem. A simple security guard is no match for me. Besides, do you really think he'd choose to raise a child that isn't his over his own safety and well-being? Sarah felt a wave of nausea. This is madness, Michael. You can't just— I can't what? He interrupted, his voice now hard as steel. Take what I want? Protect my interests? I thought you, of all people, would understand that, Sarah. After all, isn't that exactly what you've been doing? Michael's words hit her like a punch. He was right. In her eagerness to secure her future, she had played with fire, and now she was about to get burned. What if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Michael slowly stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her. Then, dear, I'm afraid both you and Jake will discover what it really means to face Michael Anderson. And believe me, it won't be pleasant. With those words, Michael left the room, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of her decisions and the terror of what was to come. That night, as she lay in the bed she now shared with a man she feared, Sarah cried silently. How had she gotten to this point? How could she protect her unborn child and Jake from Michael's clutches? As the clock ticked away the hours, Sarah realized she was trapped in a web of lies and manipulations, and that the predator who had caught her was much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself living a life that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, or a nightmare depending on the moment. On the outside, she was the future wife of magnate Michael Anderson, adored by the press and envied by Chicago's high society. On the inside, she was a trapped woman, constantly watched and manipulated by the man who claimed to love her. One morning, as she was having breakfast alone on the penthouse terrace, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's about the baby. Millennium Park, 3 p.m. Jay. Sarah felt her heart racing. Jake. She hadn't heard from him since that day in the park. What could he want now? Aware that her every move was probably being monitored, Sarah carefully planned her exit. She told Michael she was going shopping for the baby, knowing it was an excuse he would approve of. At 3 o'clock sharp, Sarah arrived at the park. She saw Jake sitting on a bench looking tired and worried. When he saw her, he quickly stood up. Sarah, thank you for coming, he said, his voice tense. Jake, what's going on? Why did you want to see me? She asked, nervously looking around. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about our situation. I can't go on like this, Sarah. I can't pretend nothing's happening while my child grows inside you. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. Jake, we've talked about this. It's complicated. I know, he interrupted. I know Michael is dangerous. But this is my child, Sarah. Our child. I can't just abandon it. What are you saying? She asked, dreading the answer. Jake's eyes filled with determination. I'm saying that if you don't allow me to be part of my child's life, I'm going to make the truth public. At the next Anderson construction event, in front of all the media. Sarah felt the world stop. You can't do that, Jake. Michael will destroy us both. Then give me another option, he pleaded. Because I can't live like this, Sarah. I can't. At that moment, Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. On one side, the life of luxury and security that Michael offered, even if it was a golden cage. On the other, the possibility of an honest life with Jake, the real father of her child, but with the constant risk of Michael's revenge. I need time, she finally said. Give me a few days to think, to find a solution. Jake nodded, though doubt was evident in his eyes. Okay, but I can't wait forever, Sarah. Time is running out. As she watched Jake walk away, Sarah felt the weight of her dilemma like never before. How could she choose between security and honesty? Between power and true love? That night, back in the penthouse, Michael greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. How was your shopping day, dear? He asked, his voice loaded with hidden meaning. Sarah felt a chill. Would he know? Had he discovered her meeting with Jake? Fine, she replied, trying to stay calm. I found some nice things for the baby. Michael nodded slowly. I'm glad. You know I only want the best for you and our child. The word our sounded like a threat in Sarah's ears. As she prepared for bed that night, Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. What should she do? Continue with the charade proposed by Michael, living a life of luxury but based on lies, or risk everything for the truth and for Jake? Her child's future, her own happiness and the safety of everyone involved hung by a thread, and Sarah knew that no matter what decision she made, someone would get hurt. As she looked out the window at the lights of Chicago, Sarah realized that time was running out. Soon she would have to make a decision that would change the course of her life forever. As her pregnancy progressed, Sarah felt increasingly trapped in the web of lies she had helped weave. The smiles for the cameras became more forced, and the nights were a torment of nightmares and remorse. One morning, while checking her email, Sarah found a message from an unknown sender. The subject simply said, "The truth always comes to light." With trembling hands, she opened the email. "Dear Sarah, I know your secret. I know the baby isn't Michael's. I know about Jake. And I know you're not the first to fall into Michael Anderson's web. I have information that could help you, but it could also destroy you. If you want to know more, find a way to contact me. I'll be waiting." Sarah felt the air leaving her lungs. Who was E, and how did they know so much? The following days were torture. Every time her phone rang, every time she received an email, Sarah felt her heart stop. Paranoia took over her. Would Michael know about the message? Was he behind all this? A week after the first message, Sarah received another email. "Time is running out, Sarah. Michael is not who you think he is. You need to know the truth before it's too late. Cafe The Black Cat tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone." Sarah knew going to that meeting was dangerous, but curiosity and desperation to find a way out of her situation overpowered her fear. The next day, under the pretext of a doctor's appointment, Sarah headed to the cafe. The place was almost empty when she entered. She sat at a table in the corner, her heart beating hard. After a few minutes that seemed eternal, an elegant middle-aged woman approached her table. "Sarah?" she asked in a soft voice. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The woman sat across from her, her eyes scrutinizing her intently. "My name is Emily, and we have a lot to talk about. Are you the one who's been sending me the messages?" Sarah asked, finally finding her voice. Emily nodded. "Yes, and before you ask, no, Michael doesn't know I'm here. At least, I hope not. Who are you? How do you know so much about me?" Sarah couldn't help the fear filtering into her voice. Emily took a sip of her coffee before answering. "I was Michael's fiancée 10 years ago, and I was in a very similar situation to yours." Sarah felt the world stop for a moment. "What do you mean?" "Michael Anderson is a dangerous man, Sarah," Emily continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Not just because of his power and money, but because of his ability to manipulate people. I too thought I could play his game and come out victorious. I was wrong." Emily proceeded to tell her story, how Michael had seduced her, promising her the world, how like Sarah she had become pregnant by another man, and how Michael had used that to control her, threatening to destroy not only her life, but that of her lover and her unborn child. "What happened?" Sarah asked, fearing the answer. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I lost the baby. The stress, the constant fear, my body couldn't take it. Michael blamed me, said I was weak, he abandoned me when I needed him most." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. "I'm so sorry, Emily, but why are you telling me all this?" "Because I don't want you to make my mistakes," Emily replied, taking Sarah's hand. "You're still in time to save yourself and your baby. But you need to be strong and clever. What can I do? Michael controls everything. If I try to leave him, he'll destroy me and Jake." Emily smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have information, Sarah. Information that could bring down Michael's empire, but I need your help to use it." Sarah looked at her, a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "What kind of information?" "Evidence of his illegal businesses, money laundering, bribes, even worse things." Emily lowered her voice even more. "I've spent the last 10 years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to use it." "And why haven't you used it already?" Sarah asked. "Because alone I'm vulnerable. Michael has resources to silence me. But with you, with your story, with the scandal it would cause, we might have a chance." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning with all this new information. On one hand, the possibility of freeing herself from Michael was tempting. On the other, could she trust this woman she barely knew? "I need time to think," she finally said. Emily nodded, understanding. "I get it. But we don't have much time, Sarah. Michael is dangerous, and the further your pregnancy progresses, the harder it will be to escape." As she got up to leave, Emily handed Sarah a small card with a phone number. "When you're ready, call me. And Sarah, be careful." That night, back in the penthouse, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Emily. Every smile from Michael, every caress, now had a sinister meaning. As she prepared for bed, her phone vibrated with a message from Jake. "I haven't forgotten our conversation. I need an answer soon. Please, Sarah, do the right thing." Lying in the darkness, with Michael sleeping beside her, Sarah realized she was in the eye of the storm. Emily's revelations, Jake's threats, Michael's manipulations, everything was converging at a critical point. Caressing her belly, Sarah made a decision. For the sake of her child, for her own sake, she had to act. But trust Emily and risk everything? Or continue Michael's game and hope to find another way out? The clock struck 3 a.m. when Sarah finally decided. With trembling hands, she took her phone and dialed the number Emily had given her. "I'm ready," she said as soon as Emily answered. "What do I have to do?" The following weeks were a whirlwind of secret activity for Sarah, clandestine meetings with Emily, exchange of information, plans elaborated in whispers, all while maintaining a facade of normality in front of Michael and the outside world. However, the stress began to take its toll. At 6 months pregnant, Sarah began to experience complications, frequent dizziness, sharp pains, even small hemorrhages that filled her with terror. One night, while having dinner with Michael, Sarah felt a pain so intense that she couldn't help but double over, dropping her water glass. "Sarah!" Michael exclaimed, running to her side. "Oh, what's wrong?" "The baby," she managed to say between gasps. Something's not right." The next few minutes were a blur. Michael calling an ambulance, the frantic trip to the hospital, doctors and nurses surrounding her. Hours later, Sarah woke up in a hospital room. Michael was sitting by her side, his face a mask of concern that Sarah no longer knew whether to believe. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Michael took her hand. "You had a threatened premature labor. The doctors managed to stop it, but—" He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "You'll need complete bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy." Sarah felt the world crumbling around her. Complete bed rest meant being confined to the penthouse, under Michael's constant surveillance. How could she continue with her plans? "The baby, is it okay?" she asked, fearing the answer. Michael nodded. "For now, yes. But the next few months will be critical." As Michael talked about the care she would need, about how he would make sure she had the best medical attention, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the complications this posed for her plans with Emily. Days later, back in the penthouse now turned into a golden prison, Sarah received an encrypted message from Emily. "Are you okay? I heard about the hospital. We need to talk urgently. Our plan is in danger." Sarah looked at the message, feeling a mixture of frustration and fear. How could she meet with Emily now? Michael barely left her alone, always with the excuse of taking care of her and the baby. That night, while Michael was working in his study, Sarah made a risky decision. Using the kitchen phone, she called Emily. "I can't get out," she whispered. "Michael watches me constantly." "This complicates things," Emily replied, concern evident in her voice. "Sarah, time is running out. Michael is making moves that suggest he suspects something." "What can we do?" Sarah asked, desperate. There was a moment of silence before Emily answered. "I have an idea, but it's risky. I need you to trust me completely." As Emily explained her plan, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and terror. It was dangerous, yes, but it could be her only chance. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll do it." Just as she was about to hang up, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she cut the call and pretended to be looking for something in the fridge. Michael entered the kitchen, an indecipherable expression on his face. "Who were you talking to, dear?" Sarah felt her heart stop. I was calling room service. I had a craving for something sweet." Michael looked at her intently for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he smiled. "You should have told me. I'll go get you something myself. What do you feel like?" As Michael left the penthouse to fetch the non-existent craving, Sarah leaned against the counter, her body shaking. Had he believed her? Or was Michael playing his own game, letting her believe she had fooled him? One thing was clear: time was running out. With her health at risk, the baby in danger, and Michael increasingly suspicious, Sarah knew she would soon have to make decisions that would change the course of her life forever. Caressing her belly, she whispered a promise to her unborn child: "I'll protect you no matter what it costs." What Sarah didn't know was that, at that very moment, other forces were in motion. Forces that would soon converge, bringing her story to a climax that no one could have foreseen. As Sarah dealt with her confinement and Michael's growing suspicions, another actor entered the scene, threatening to further destabilize the already precarious situation. One afternoon, while Michael was in a business meeting, the penthouse doorbell rang. Sarah, surprised as they rarely received unannounced visits, cautiously approached the door. Upon opening it, she found herself face to face with an elegant woman in her 40s, with penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, unsure. The woman smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Sarah. I'm Katherine Walker, an old friend of Michael's." Something in Katherine's tone made Sarah tense up. "Michael's not home right now." "Oh, I know," Katherine replied, entering the penthouse without waiting for an invitation. "Actually, I've come to talk to you." Sarah closed the door, her mind working at full speed. Who was this woman, and what did she want from her? Katherine walked around the living room, observing the photographs and art objects. Nice place. Michael always had good taste in some things. "Excuse me, but what do you want to talk to me about?" Sarah asked, trying to stay calm. Katherine turned to her, her eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and something darker. "I want to talk about you, about Michael, and about the dangerous game you're playing." Sarah felt her heart racing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," said Katherine, approaching. "You see, years ago I was in your position, Michael Anderson's young and beautiful girlfriend, expecting a child that wasn't his." The words hit Sarah like a punch. Another woman. How many more had Michael deceived? "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Katherine smiled again, this time with a coldness that chilled Sarah's blood. "I want to warn you, Michael is not the man you think he is. He's dangerous, manipulative, and he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah struggled to maintain her composure. "Because, dear, I wish someone had warned me," Katherine replied, her voice loaded with bitterness. "But also because I know you're planning something, and I want to be part of it." Sarah looked at her, surprised. "I don't know what you're talking about." Katherine let out a dry laugh. "Please don't underestimate me. I know about your meetings with Emily. I know about the security guard, the real father of your child. And I know you're looking for a way out." How do you know all that?" Sarah asked, feeling panic taking over her. "I have my own resources," Katherine replied enigmatically, "and I also have my own score to settle with Michael." At that moment, the sound of keys in the door made both women startle. Michael had returned. Katherine quickly approached Sarah, whispering, "Don't tell him I was here. I'll contact you soon. Remember, you're not alone in this." With surprising agility, Katherine went out to the balcony and disappeared, just as Michael entered the living room. "Sarah, dear, who were you talking to?" Michael asked, his voice casual but his eyes scrutinizing. Sarah, still stunned by the encounter, managed to compose a smile. "No one, just talking to the baby." Michael looked at her intently for a moment before smiling. "Of course. How have you been feeling today?" As Michael approached to hug her, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Katherine's words. How many more secrets did Michael keep? And what role would Katherine play in the already complicated chess game her life had become? That night, as Michael slept, Sarah found herself awake, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Katherine, Emily, Jake, Michael. They were all pieces of an increasingly complex and dangerous puzzle. The following days were a hell of nerves for Sarah. Every sound startled her. Every look from Michael seemed to hide a hidden meaning. Katherine's visit had shaken the foundations of her already fragile reality. One morning, as she was having breakfast alone on the terrace, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Meet me in an hour. The building's rooftop. Don't be late. C. Sarah felt her heart racing. Katherine. How did she expect her to go up to the rooftop in her condition? But curiosity and desperation overpowered prudence. With the excuse of wanting some fresh air, Sarah managed to convince the bodyguard Michael had assigned to take care of her, to let her go up to the rooftop alone. When she arrived, she found Katherine waiting for her, her elegant figure silhouetted against the Chicago skyline. "I see you decided to come," Katherine said without turning around. Sarah approached cautiously. "What do you want from me?" Katherine finally turned to face her, her eyes shining with a mixture of determination and something Sarah couldn't identify. Pain. Revenge. "I want the same thing you do, Sarah. Freedom. And Michael Anderson's downfall." Over the next hour, Katherine revealed to Sarah a story that left her breathless. Years of manipulation, blackmail, and covered-up crimes. Michael wasn't just an unscrupulous businessman. He was a criminal who had built his empire on lies and blood. "But why are you telling me all this?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed by the revelations. Katherine looked at her intently. "Because I need your help, and because, despite everything, a part of me wants to save you from making my same mistakes." Just as Katherine was about to reveal her plan, the rooftop door burst open. Michael appeared, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Well, what an interesting meeting," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "My dear wife and my ex-lover conspiring together. How touching." Sarah felt the world stop. How had he found them? How much had he heard? Michael approached, his presence filling the space. "Katherine, dear, I thought I had made it clear you weren't welcome in my life." "And Sarah," he turned to her, his eyes cold as ice, "you've deeply disappointed me." "Michael, Sarah began, but he interrupted her with a brusque gesture. "Silence. Both of you go downstairs now. We have a lot to talk about." As they followed Michael back to the penthouse, Sarah exchanged a panicked look with Katherine. What would happen now? Was everything lost? In the penthouse, Michael made them sit on the sofa while he paced in front of them like a caged lion. "So, you thought you could deceive me? Me?" His laugh was cold, humorless. "Katherine, I thought you had learned your lesson years ago. And Sarah, I trusted you." "Trust." Sarah found her voice, indignation momentarily overcoming fear. "How can you talk about trust after everything you've done?" Michael stopped, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and something else. Admiration? "I see Katherine has been busy filling your head with stories." "They're not just stories, Michael," Katherine intervened, "and you know it." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, to the surprise of both women, Michael smiled. But it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, since all the cards are on the table, let me add mine," he said, pulling out his phone. "Sarah, dear, do you remember your friend Jake?" Sarah's heart stopped. Michael showed the screen of his phone, where there was an image of Jake clearly beaten and tied up. "What have you done to him?" Sarah cried, trying to stand up, but the pain in her belly made her double over. Michael looked at her with false concern. "Careful, dear. Remember the baby. As for Jake, well, let's say he's reconsidering his paternity options." Katherine stood up, facing Michael. "You're a monster." "No, Katherine," he replied, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm a businessman. And you two are now my most important business." He turned to Sarah. "You have two options, dear. You continue with our agreement, marry me, and we raise this baby as ours. Or," he paused dramatically, "Jake disappears, and you find yourself alone, penniless, and with a scandal that will destroy your life." Sarah felt the world closing in around her. How had she gotten to this point? How could she choose between her freedom and Jake's life? Katherine, seeing the pain in Sarah's eyes, stepped forward. "Michael, this has gone too far. Let her go. You have me. I was the one who started all this." Michael looked at her, a cruel smile on his lips. "Oh, Katherine, always so noble. But I'm afraid your days of negotiating with me ended long ago." At that moment, Michael's phone rang. Seeing the number, he frowned. "Excuse me, ladies. Important business. Don't go anywhere," he said sarcastically before leaving the room. As soon as Michael disappeared, Katherine approached Sarah. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered urgently. "This isn't over. I have a plan B, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Sarah, with tears in her eyes, nodded. What should I do? Katherine looked towards the door, making sure Michael hadn't returned yet. When I give the signal, run. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. Understood? Before Sarah could respond, Michael returned, his face a mask of barely contained fury. It seems we have a bigger problem than I thought, he said, looking at both women suspiciously. Someone has leaked compromising information to the press. I wonder, which one of you two could it have been? The air in the room became electric. Sarah looked at Katherine, who maintained an impassive expression. Was this the plan B she had talked about? Michael approached menacingly. I'm going to find out who's behind this, and when I do... He couldn't finish the sentence. At that moment, the penthouse lights went out suddenly, plunging everything into darkness. Now! Katherine shouted. In the confusion that followed, Sarah felt someone grabbing her arm and dragging her towards the door. Her heart was beating hard, fear and adrenaline propelling her despite the pain in her belly. As she ran down the hallway, she heard shouts and the sound of things breaking behind her. But true to Katherine's instructions, she didn't look back. The last thing she heard before the elevator doors closed was Michael's furious voice. I'll find you, no matter where you hide. As the elevator descended, Sarah leaned against the wall, panting. What had just happened? Where was she going? And most importantly, what would happen now? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The elevator stopped abruptly in the underground parking lot. The doors opened to reveal Emily, waiting with a running car. Quick, Emily shouted. We don't have much time. Sarah, still stunned by recent events, hurried towards the vehicle. As they drove away from the building, she couldn't help but look back, wondering what had become of Katherine. Where's Katherine? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Emily kept her eyes on the road, her expression tense. She stayed to distract Michael. It was part of the plan. Plan? What plan? Sarah felt her head spinning. Did you two know each other? Emily nodded gravely. Katherine and I have been working together for years to bring Michael down. You were the final piece we needed. Sarah fell silent, processing this new information. So many lies, so many layers of deception. Who could she really trust? After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a house on the outskirts of the city. Upon entering, Sarah was surprised to see Jake waiting for them. Jake! She exclaimed, running towards him. I thought Michael said... Jake hugged her tightly. I'm fine. It was all part of the plan to deceive Michael. Sarah pulled away, looking at everyone with a mixture of confusion and anger. Can someone explain to me what's going on? Emily sat down, indicating to the others to do the same. It's time you know the whole truth, Sarah. Over the next few hours, Emily and Jake revealed to Sarah the true magnitude of the operation against Michael. Years of planning, infiltration, and evidence gathering. Katherine, Emily, and even Jake had been key pieces in an elaborate chess game designed to expose Michael Anderson's crimes. But why me? Sarah asked, still trying to assimilate everything. Because we needed someone Michael wouldn't suspect, Emily explained. Someone who could get close enough to obtain the last piece of evidence we needed. Jake took Sarah's hand. We never wanted to put you in danger. But when we discovered you were pregnant, we knew it was our opportunity. Sarah withdrew her hand, feeling betrayed. So it was all a lie. Our encounter. Your feelings. Jake looked at her with pleading eyes. No, Sarah. My feelings for you are real. That was never part of the plan. Before Sarah could respond, Emily intervened. I know it's a lot to process, but we don't have much time. Right now, the evidence against Michael is being delivered to the authorities and the media. As if on cue, the TV in the corner of the room came to life with breaking news. Scandal in the business world. Michael Anderson, CEO of Anderson Construction, accused of multiple crimes. Evidence suggests years of fraud, money laundering, and possible murder. Sarah watched in shock as the image of Michael, the man she had feared and in some ways admired, was torn apart in front of the whole country. Suddenly, a sharp pain in her belly made her double over. The baby, she gasped. I think the baby's coming. The room descended into chaos. Jake and Emily helped her up, quickly heading towards the car. As they headed to the hospital, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Her child, conceived amidst lies and deception, was about to be born in a moment of truth and revelation. In the delivery room, as Sarah struggled to bring her child into the world, news kept coming in. Michael Anderson had been arrested. Katherine was safe and cooperating with the authorities. The Anderson empire was crumbling before the eyes of the entire country. With one last effort and a heart-wrenching cry, Sarah gave birth to a beautiful boy. As she held him in her arms, with Jake by her side, she realized that this was the real beginning. Not the one she had planned, not the one she had imagined, but one full of possibilities and, for the first time in a long time, hope. Outside the hospital room, Emily observed the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. Her mission was accomplished, but at what cost? Taking out her phone, she dialed a familiar number. "It's done," she said simply. The voice on the other end responded, "Good work, now the final phase." Emily hung up, looking once more towards the room where Sarah and Jake were cooing over their baby. What came next would perhaps be the hardest of all. The days following the baby's birth were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. The joy of being a mother mixed with anxiety about the uncertain future that awaited her. News kept coming. Michael was facing multiple charges, his empire was crumbling, and the details of his crimes were coming to light one after another. One afternoon, as Sarah rested in her hospital room with the baby in her arms, Emily entered with a serious expression on her face. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know," Emily began, sitting on the edge of the bed. Sarah looked at her, a feeling of dread growing in her chest. What else can there be? Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "The operation against Michael, it was bigger than we told you. It involved government agencies, international intelligence services. Michael wasn't just a corrupt businessman, he was part of a global criminal network." Sarah felt the world stop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your role in all of this was more crucial than you imagine. Without knowing it, you helped dismantle one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the continent." Emily's words fell like a weight on Sarah. Her whole life, her decisions, her struggles, had they been part of a much bigger plan? "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emily looked at her with a mixture of admiration and regret. "Because you deserve to know the truth. And because we need your help one more time." At that moment, Jake entered the room, his face a mask of concern. "Emily, are you sure this is the right time?" Emily nodded gravely. "We have no choice. It's now or never." Sarah looked from Emily to Jake, confusion and fear growing inside her. "What are you talking about? What else do you need from me?" Jake approached, taking Sarah's free hand. "Sarah, what we're going to ask you is difficult, but it's crucial for your safety and the baby's." Emily continued, "Michael's organization has deep ramifications. Even though he's behind bars, there are others who will seek revenge. We need you to disappear." "Disappear?" Sarah felt short of breath. "What do you mean?" "Witness protection program," Jake explained softly. "A new identity, a new life, away from all this." Sarah looked at her baby, who was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the chaos surrounding him. "But what about you? And my family?" Emily lowered her gaze. "It's for their safety too. The less they know, the better." Silence filled the room as Sarah processed this new information. Everything she had fought for, everything she had known. Would she have to leave it all behind? "And Jake?" she finally asked, looking at the father of her child. "What will happen to him?" Jake and Emily exchanged a meaningful look. "That's your decision, Sarah," Jake said softly. "I can go with you if that's what you want. Or I can stay and continue working to make sure you're safe from here." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. A new life, a new identity. Was that the price of safety? When she opened her eyes again, there was a determination in them that surprised Emily and Jake. "If we're going to do this," Sarah said, her voice firm, "we'll do it on my terms. No more secrets, no more manipulations. I want to know everything." Emily nodded, a small smile of respect forming on her lips. "Very well. We'll tell you everything you need to know." The following hours were an avalanche of information. The following hours were Sarah listened about undercover operations, years of investigation, sacrifices made by people she would never know. With each revelation, the world she knew transformed. expanding and contracting at the same time. When it finally came time to make a decision, Sarah looked at her son and then at Jake. "We'll go together," she finally said. "This child deserves to have both his parents, and we deserve a chance to be a real family without lies or deception." Jake hugged her, tears of relief and emotion in his eyes. "I promise I'll do everything I can to make it work, to protect both of you." Emily observed the scene with a mixture of emotions. Her mission was accomplished, but the cost had been high. Lives changed forever, truths revealed that could not be forgotten. "I'll give you a moment," she said, heading towards the door. "I'll be back later with the final details." As Emily left the room, Sarah and Jake remained embraced, their son between them. The future was uncertain, full of unknown challenges and dangers, but for the first time in a long time, it was also full of hope. Outside the hospital, the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with orange and pink hues. A new day was approaching, bringing with it the beginning of a new life for Sarah, Jake, and their son. A life built on hard but honest truths, on love born from adversity, and the promise of a better future. 6 months later, the sun peeked over the mountains, illuminating a small house on the outskirts of a quiet town in northern Maine. Sarah, now known as Emma Collins, woke up to the soft cry of her son, Noah. She got up silently, trying not to wake Jake, who now went by the name of Ethan. As she fed Noah, Sarah reflected on the turns her life had taken in the last year. The Witness Protection Program had provided them with a new identity, a new home, and the opportunity to start from scratch. But adapting to this new reality hadn't been easy. There were nights when Sarah woke up startled, believing she heard Michael's voice. Days when nostalgia for her old life, her family and friends, hit her hard. Jake entered the room, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning, love," he said, softly kissing Sarah and caressing Noah's head. "Good morning," she replied with a smile. Despite the difficulties, moments like this made everything worthwhile. As they had breakfast, Jake checked the news on his tablet. Although they were supposed to stay away from their past, they couldn't help but look for information about the Anderson case. "So it seems Michael's trial is coming to an end," Jake commented. "The prosecution is asking for life in prison." Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Despite everything Michael had done to her, a part of her still felt a confusing mix of emotions towards him. "Do you think we'll ever be able to go back?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake put down the tablet and took her hand. "I don't know, love. But what I do know is that whatever happens, we'll be together." The sound of the doorbell startled them. They weren't expecting visitors, and in their new life, surprises were rarely welcome. Jake cautiously approached the door, while Sarah protectively hugged Noah. When Jake opened it, they both gasped. Emily was standing on the threshold, with a serious expression on her face. "I'm sorry to appear like this," she said. Quickly entering, Emily quickly entered and closed the door behind her. "But we have a situation." Sarah felt fear taking hold of her. "What's happening? Have they found us?" Emily shook her head. "No, you're safe. But there's been a development in the Anderson case that you need to know about." Over the next hour, Emily briefed them on the latest events. Michael, facing a certain sentence, had decided to make a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for a reduction in his sentence, he was willing to provide information about the international criminal network he was part of. "This changes things," Emily explained. "With Michael's information, we could dismantle the entire organization. But you need my testimony," Sarah completed, immediately understanding. Emily nodded. "Your testimony could be the final piece we need to close this case once and for all." Jake stood up, agitated. "No, it's too dangerous. We've built a life here. We have Noah to think about." Sarah looked at her son, who was playing oblivious to the tension in the room. Then she looked at Jake and finally at Emily. "If I testify," she said slowly, "will it be over? Will we be able to return to our normal life?" Emily hesitated for a moment. "I can't promise you it will be easy or that there won't be risks. But I can tell you it will be your best chance to close this chapter once and for all." Silence filled the room as Sarah and Jake looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath. "I'll do it," she said with determination. "But on one condition." Emily looked at her expectantly. "When this is all over, I want the truth. The whole truth. About the operation, about my role in it, about everything. Emily nodded solemnly. You have my word. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. As they got ready to return to Chicago, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was about to face her past once and for all. The morning of their departure, Sarah stood on the porch of what had been their home for the past 6 months. She looked at the mountains, breathing deeply the fresh morning air. Jake joined her, Noah in his arms. Are you ready? He asked softly. Sarah nodded, taking Jake's hand. I'm ready for the truth, whatever it may be. As they got into the car that would take them to the airport, Sarah looked one last time at the house that had been their refuge. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it with courage. The car started, taking them towards a new chapter in their lives. As the landscape quickly passed by the window, Sarah thought about everything she had lived through, the lies and truths that had shaped her existence. But as she held Jake's hand and looked at her son, she realized that, despite everything, she had found something real and valuable: love, family, and the strength to face any challenge that fate might put in her path. The sun rose on the horizon, promising a new day, and with it, the promise of a future in which the truth, however hard it might be, would finally come to light. As the car drove away down the winding road, Sarah whispered to herself, "This time, I'm writing the story." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a secure location in downtown Chicago, preparing for her testimony. The gravity of what she was about to do weighed heavily on her. She was not just testifying against Michael Anderson, but against an entire criminal network that spanned continents. Jake sat beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said softly. Sarah shook her head. "No, I need to do this. For us, for Noah, for all the people Michael and his organization have hurt." Emily entered the room, her face a mask of professional calm. "It's time, Sarah. Are you ready?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah stood up. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed as Sarah took the stand. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but she focused on Jake's supportive gaze from the gallery. As she began to speak, detailing her experiences with Michael Anderson and the information she had unwittingly gathered, Sarah felt a strange sense of empowerment. She was no longer the naive young woman who had walked into Michael's trap. She was a survivor, a mother, and now a key witness in bringing down a criminal empire. Hours passed as Sarah testified, answering questions from both the prosecution and the defense. Michael sat at the defendant's table, his once imposing presence now diminished in his prison jumpsuit. Their eyes met once, and Sarah was surprised to find not anger, but a mixture of resignation and something that almost looked like respect in his gaze. As she stepped down from the witness stand, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done it. She had faced her past and spoken her truth. The trial continued for several more weeks, with a parade of witnesses and mountains of evidence. Sarah, Jake, and Noah remained under protection, following the proceedings from a safe distance. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Sarah and Jake sat tensely in their safe house, watching the live feed from the courtroom. In the case of the United States versus Michael Anderson, on the counts of racketeering, money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty on all charges. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Jake pulled her into a tight embrace as they both began to cry, tears of relief, of joy, of the release of years of tension and fear. Emily arrived shortly after, her usual composure cracking to reveal a genuine smile. "It's over," she said. "Michael Anderson will spend the rest of his life in prison, and we've already made significant progress in dismantling the rest of the organization." "So what happens now?" Jake asked, his arm still around Sarah. Emily's expression turned serious. "Now, as promised, you get the whole truth." Over the next few hours, Emily revealed the full extent of the operation, how government agencies had been tracking Michael's organization for years, how Sarah's chance encounter with Michael had provided an unexpected opportunity, how Jake had been carefully vetted and brought into the operation. "We never anticipated you two would genuinely fall in love," Emily admitted. "That wasn't part of the plan, but it turned out to be what made everything work." Sarah and Jake exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected gift their ordeal had given them. "And now," Sarah asked, "can we go back to our old lives?" Emily shook her head. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Too many people know your faces now, but," she added, seeing their crestfallen expressions, "we can offer you a new start. Anywhere in the world you want to go, with your true identities, but with continued protection." Sarah and Jake looked at each other, then at Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib. "We need some time to think about it," Jake said. Emily nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." As Emily left, Sarah walked to the window looking out at the Chicago skyline. So much had changed since she first arrived in this city, with dreams of a better life. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" Sarah leaned back into his embrace. "I'm thinking that maybe it's time for a real fresh start. Somewhere we can build a life on our own terms without secrets or lies." Jake kissed her temple. "Wherever you want to go, I'm with you. You and Noah are my home now." Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had been her rock through this entire ordeal. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Jake replied, leaning down to kiss her. As they stood there holding each other and looking out at the city, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was truly theirs to shape. Noah's soft cry broke the moment, and they both chuckled. "Duty calls," Jake said with a smile. As they walked hand in hand to tend to their son, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story, which had begun with lies and deception, had transformed into one of love, truth, and redemption. And as the sun set on Chicago, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah whispered a silent thank you to the universe. For second chances, for unexpected love, and for the power of truth to set them free.